Okay, so we're going to get started, and this session is called Why Should We Care About Bibliodiversity in Academic Book Publishing? And I'm Charles Watkinson. I'm Director of University of Michigan Press, and I'm this year's President of the Association of University Presses. And here next to me, I have next year's President of the Association of University Presses, Jane Bunker from Cornell. I have last year's President of the Association of University Presses, Lisa Baer, and I have Jason Fikes, so Lisa's from University of Georgia Press, the director, and Jason Fikes, who's the director of Abilene Christian University Press, and he is the chair of the Library Relations Committee. So it's very good to see you all. Thank you for being here, and any of you who were here yesterday at the vendor showcase will have seen some of these faces around the place, and you will have seen our little name tag sort of badge edition saying hashtag #ReadUp, ReadUP. And on your chairs, or near your chairs, you'll find a leaflet that advertises three things connected to the Association of University Presses: our new peer review handbook, just released; Ask Up, which is a resource for authors, which I think you might find very, very useful as you talk to your faculty about publishing choices; and a listing for University Press Week, which is coming up November the 14th to the 18th. So actually, when the virtual conference is being broadcast is University Press Week. And that's a celebration of independent publishing with independent bookstores also involved. And then on the back of the leaflet is a list of all the members of the Association of University Presses. So yesterday, you will have seen some of my colleagues around the vendor showcase, and you'll have also seen the first ever exhibit by the Association of University Presses. And what was interesting, of course, about the vendor showcase is who wasn't there, as well as who was there. Because this is a map of the US and Canada that shows all the university presses in our membership across the whole country, right to University of Guam Press, all the way through to University, let's see, who's the furthest east? But anyhow, far east of the US and Canada. And then in addition to these on the map, you'll see an increasing number of international presses that are in other parts of the world. And this is an association that's increasing in its size as new university presses get started and university presses join across the world. The little stars on here show the location of the presses represented on this podium, with University of Michigan Press, Cornell University Press, Georgia, and Abilene Christian. So the title of this panel refers to bibliodiversity. And this is a term that I want to be very clear is not being owned in any way by the people in this group or by the university press community, because bibliodiversity is a term that has been used broadly in Latin America, where it really started being generated, through to Europe, where it has very strong connotations with multilingualism, and it applies equally to small independent publishers, and it has no particular connection with open access. It refers to this cultural flowering of small independent presses that exist in the book publishing landscape absolutely ubiquitously across the world. So this International Declaration of Independent Publishers, which was a group sponsored by UNESCO when they released this statement in 2014, refers to bibliodiversity as cultural diversity applied to the world of books. It's a complex, self-sustaining system of storytelling, writing, publishing, and other kinds of production of oral and written literature. And bibliodiversity contributes to a thriving life of culture and a healthy eco-social system. So it's a term clearly closely related to biodiversity, and it has the same connotations of threat. So in the same way as there's threat to biodiversity, we're seeing forces in our environment which are a threat to bibliodiversity. And that's really why we're raising this theme to your attention today. So if we take this lens of bibliodiversity, which absolutely can be applied to other groups of publishers of all sorts, and apply it to the Association of University Presses, we see that university presses, which can be viewed as a fairly unitary group of entities, and are most familiar to many of you, I think, through Cambridge University Press and Oxford University Press and Duke and some of the publishers who turn up here and have the resources to summon your attention. It's actually a very, very diverse group of publishers indeed. So the association has 158 members in 17 countries. Around 100 of those are using the term university press, but we also have members who are gallery publishers, museum publishers, think tank publishers, learned society publishers. Over 1/3 of the 100, however, report to libraries now, and that number keeps increasing. And this is a really interesting figure that more than half have an annual income under $1.5 million. So these are very small publishers. And together, we publish over 1,500 journals, 12,000 books annually, with over 330,000 titles in print. So that may sound a lot initially, but think about this. So Wiley publishes 1,600 journals. So one company publishes more than all the journals published by university presses. 12,000 books annually compares to Taylor & Francis, that publishes 8,000 books annually. So one company publishes almost as many books as all of us as university presses. And we have 330,000 titles in print, which compares to the Springer collection of 300,000 titles. So just to put it into context as to why we are a very small group of publishers. We are united in the association by 4 core values: integrity, diversity and inclusion, intellectual freedom, particularly relevant today when we have to stand up against book banning and censorship of other sorts, and stewardship, a stewardship to the long-term sustainability of the scholarly publishing ecosystem and the knowledge that we steward for our authors. So with all this framing in mind, the origin of this session was that I asked 3 colleagues, 3 university press directors, the question, what does bibliodiversity mean to you? And in the spirit of diversity, I didn't give them any other guidance. It was like, express this as you want to express it. So what you're going to hear is 3 colleagues expressing this in their own way. What does bibliodiversity mean to you? But I'd like you to listen for the following themes as you hear them speak. The first one is that it's very familiar, I think, to lots of us that many university presses do regional publishing. So the natural history of Michigan or the natural history of the Northeast, or books on culture, books on cooking, books on regional history. But I want you to listen for the idea that there's also within the academic monographs that these publishers produce a groundedness, a sense of embeddedness in a region, in an institutional type, in their own space. So grounded versus regional. The second thing I want you to listen to is the way in which, for university presses, as for other independent publishers, publishing is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So you'll hear my colleagues express what they were trying to do with a particular publishing program, what they were trying to achieve, the change they were trying to make in the world with the publishing that they're doing. And finally, you'll hear a sense of the time and labor that's needed to ensure all voices are heard. So I think one of the special parts of university press publishing is a great deal of care, an ethics of care, that is about spending the time that's needed to ensure that voices from the margins are lifted up. And that will often require a lot of hand-holding, a lot of nurturing, years, possibly even decades of development and help for the authors who we publish. So with that framing, I'm going to hand over to the speakers. Because we're all enthusiastic about the things we publish, university press people have a habit of getting carried away. So to stop them getting carried away, I've told them that after 10 minutes, something large and hairy is going to attack them and bring them down. And that is my father, who's sitting down here. So he's going to attack the speakers, and if they go over. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jane Bunker, the director at Cornell University Press.
I'm not nervous at all now, Charles. Thank you very much. I'm Jane Bunker. I currently work as director of Cornell University Press. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Before that, I was director at Northwestern University Press, which is one of those presses making less than 1.5 million. I'll be talking about books published at both those presses this afternoon, 3 from each. But let me start with the basic stats. Northwestern had a staff of 15 and publishes about 75 books a year. Cornell has a staff of 38 and publishes 175 books a year. Both presses are under the umbrella of their library. And before I dive into the books, I want to thank Charles for introducing me to the term bibliodiversity, a term with which I had not been familiar before being asked to speak about it for this panel. To my delight, I learned that I've been working to increase bibliodiversity my entire career. As a rebellious tree-hugging nature lover, it was satisfying to realize that in addition to the small contributions I could make to helping biodiversity, for example, by being a careful consumer, buying organic, being vegetarian, having a CSA share. CSA stands for Community-Supported Agriculture. We're thinking a lot at Cornell about whether or not we might be able to have something similar for books. So in addition to that, I'd also been, in my professional life, however inadvertently, working to maintain the balance of bibliodiversity in the scholarly ecosystem. So what do I mean by this? First slide, Charles, thank you. This is a book published at Northwestern, The Fourfold by Andrew Mitchell, a philosopher. This is a book on Heidegger, but I'm not going to speak so much about the book itself as about the fact that it came out in the SPEP series, which is a series of books established in 1962. The acronym SPEP stands for Studies in Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy. This series was founded by a faculty member in the Department of Philosophy at the time at Northwestern. The department was one of the most pluralistic departments in North America. Faculty were doing work on what is known as continental thought as opposed to analytic. This is a somewhat famous divide if you were in philosophy. And this synergy between the work being done on campus and the work published by the press made for an exemplary campus partnership. Over the years, the department changed significantly. It's no longer considered a top department for continental thought, but the strength of the list that the press developed has not wavered, and the series continues today, over 60 years later. And this series helped bring the work of Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, Sartre, Marcel, and many others to English-speaking audiences for the first time. Next slide. So from the sublime to the ridiculous, this book, Rosie the Tarantula, another of my acquisitions, I have a broad scope, is the true story of an escaped arachnid who went on a multi-month adventure in Chicago's Field Museum before being found one day and returned to her terrarium in the bug guy's office. Peggy McNamara, artist in residence at the Field Museum, and her daughter Katie collaborated to write this book. It has the rhythm and cadence of The Night Before Christmas. It's a really fun book to read out loud to children, and it sells in the gift shop at the Field. It's truly one of my proudest acquisitions. It's the quintessential partnership with a local cultural institution, the sort of thing that university presses are great at. Next slide. The final Northwestern book I'll talk about is Improvisation for the Theater by Viola Spolin. It's now in its 3rd edition. It was published originally in 1963. The early 60s were a very rich time at the press. Spolin was Chicago born and bred, and while you may not have heard of her, you've probably heard of improv. She's known as the mother of improv. She's developed dozens of games for actors to play that went on to be used by her son, Paul Sills, who was one of the founders of Second City in Chicago. The press also published several more of Spolin's books, all of them, actually, if I'm not mistaken, and they continue to sell very well to this day. I should have said originally Evanston. Northwestern is located in Evanston, which is a city adjacent to Chicago, just north. So its regional identity is very important in the acquisition of all of these books. And having Spolin on the list at Northwestern helped editors there go on to develop really, really good lists, prestigious lists in theater and performance studies more broadly, which is also not incidentally a departmental strength at the university. Next slide. Thank you. So moving on to Cornell now, where I've been for 2 years. This is the first of 3 books published via 3 separate imprints at Cornell. Cornell Press has 8 imprints overall. And Liberty's Chain is the story of the Jay family of New York. John Jay was a diplomat, Supreme Court justice, and co-author of the Federalist Papers. And his descendants helped chart the course of the early American Republic. This is a book deeply rooted in New York State. It fulfills the mission of the Three Hills imprint perfectly, which is to publish books devoted to the history, people, culture, and environment of New York State. It is a smart, provocative, nonfiction book about a preeminent founding family on a topic of increasing importance. Next slide. Weeds of the Northeast, now available in an expanded, updated, and revised edition. It's taken us a few years to get there, but very happy to say this book is now out in its revised edition. Is one of the gems on our Comstock imprint. Comstock was originally founded in 1893, and books on this list are for both academic and non-academic readers in the fields of science, nature, and the environment. This book is basically the comprehensive reference book on weeds. I should say when I revealed that this was one of my books, Lisa immediately said that one of Georgia's most popular books is it Weeds of the Southeast?
Weeds of the South.
There you go. Weeds of the South. Many university presses have local plant books, and in this book by Susan Hawthorne, Bibliodiversity, a manifesto for independent publishing, analogies between reading and nature abound. And I would just like to read one relevant section from this book. When Charles first asked us to speak about bibliodiversity, I thought, well, I have to find out what it is. So I read this book, and it's fantastic. Susan Hawthorne is the founder of Spinifex Press in Australia, an independent feminist press. And she writes, as her conclusion to this book, she writes about many of the commonalities between biodiversity, of course, and the conclusion is particularly striking. She says, bibliodiversity must turn ecological principles into socio-ecological principles. These principles are about complex living systems that are constantly in flux, reflecting the ever-changing shape of natural and cultural shift. Our abuses of nature are resulting in an overheated planet, driving headlong towards severe climate change. Our abuses of culture are resulting in increasing levels of violence reflected in books that are the cultural equivalent of climate change, promoting hatred and misogyny, monocultural violence against the other, and warmongering. She wrote that in 2014. Finally, next slide. We have a book from our ILR Press imprint. Cornell has a very well-known school in industrial and labor relations. It has its own library. It has its own publishing arm, established over 50 years ago. In the 90s, it became an imprint of Cornell Press. And in it, we publish books about workplace issues, labor, management, and social policy that appeal to a diverse readership of scholars and students, practitioners, and increasingly, the broader public. And in this book, Reunion, the author is exploring how labor unions are essential to all workers. So I really appreciate your attention to this handful of the many books whose content, outlook, and voice are grounded in local soils. A final note, Liberty's Chain is the only one of these books that's published on a regional trade imprint. University presses excel at many things, but chief among them are acquiring and marketing content that matters by authors who have a unique perspective. Our commitment to bibliodiversity going forward at Cornell is to continue to focus on our mission, building the scholarly record with monographs, translations, engaged scholarship, and publishing books for practitioners and of regional interest. Look for more innovative partnerships in our future, definitely with our library, perhaps with a focus on indigeneity, maybe even another children's book, this time on bats. Our tagline at Cornell Press is changing the world one book at a time. Thank you for your support of university presses, which I now know is like supporting a CSA. Think global, act local.
Thank you, Jane. So over to you, Jason.
Well, as I get started, we were looking at each other's slides and the books about weeds, and I don't have a weed book. I'm so sorry. Texas A&M already published that work, so the weeds of the Southwest is Texas A&M. But let's talk about my list. Abilene Christian is a private university in West Texas. Our students come from across the nation in 46 countries. About 39% of the student body is racially and ethnically diverse, 20% Hispanic, 14% Black, with smaller percentages of Asian, Pacific Islander, and Native American students. Before the town of Abilene was established along a railroad line in 1881, numerous refugees passed through this region for hundreds of years, sometimes living along its creeks and valleys. The Huanmos and Comanche peoples were the most prominent. Our institution continues to process the erasures and exclusions that settler colonialism and white supremacy have brought to our part of the world. ACU Press is a department of the library on campus. We're a small Group 1 publisher in the AU Presses community. We publish about 20 titles each year. Our list consists of 3 main branches that I want to talk with you about that are kind of represented by the slide we have here. A branch of strong trade Christian imprint books under the heading Leafwood Publishers that try to make faith and life understandable to everyday believers. Another branch is a distinctive line of titles about Christian higher education and some select textbooks. And the third branch are books that celebrate Texas and West Texas history and culture. And I would have worn my Astros hat today, but they're not doing very well. So I better not do that and jinx them. So that should give you a thumbnail of who we are. And let me move forward by sharing with you some titles. So go ahead, Charles. So let me start with Jesus, Love, and Tacos by Carrie Stevens. This is an enjoyable, funny, vacation-style read with a surprising amount of spice that can lift someone's personal faith out of the doldrums. It's a very witty and clever book. She has footnotes all through this book, and when I first saw it, I was like, you cannot put footnotes in a trade book, but they make the book. We've been able to offer Carrie extra support in marketing her work and her launch team, and we do that really reasonably well because she's in Austin, and she and her husband are pastors for a church in the Austin area, and Texas publishers working with folks who live in our state is a great fit. The next regional author I'd like to mention is Caitlin Garrison and her book, Sweet Relief. She's a 20-something-year-old author from Alamogordo in New Mexico. And if you're trying to position, well, where is Abilene? We're in West Texas, so that's about 350 miles from New Mexico there in Alamogordo. And she's trying to help readers emerging from COVID who are struggling with a kind of performance-based religion. And you might find it interesting that we're helping Caitlin participate in Proverbs 31, which is a national evangelical women's ministry led by Lisa Turkhurst, who lives closer to here in North Carolina. So ACU Press has connected with Caitlin to bring her book into a broader national platform. So let me show you a series of books that we've done that are regional in nature. The idea behind these books was that we needed to reach third graders and their parents. And the idea is that ACU Press should make a difference in literacy by encouraging history and civic pride among our youngest readers. So we got Midland A to Z and San Angelo A to Z and Abilene A to Z. And these books came into formation through great partnerships with community foundations, where I reached out to them and said, I want to put a book in the hands of every third grader in your public school system. And those community foundations responded. They helped make that possible, gave a lot of free books, and the hope is that we can lower some incarceration rates because we get kids reading at grade level in the third grade, because that makes all the difference in the world. Can you show the next slide? I just thought for fun you should see the interior of San Angelo A to Z. That should be the next slide you have there. D is for donkeys, right? That gives you a feel for what that looks like on the inside. So that says something about our trade and local publishing. Let me talk about elevating voices by just two titles. This is from our Spring 21 list. It's A Million Skies. And Abigail Alleman is a bipolar author. Her story of mental illness is not one in which she was able to sort of graduate and leave mental illness behind. It's much more about embracing a struggle that is part of who you are. And having mental illness was not her choice, it's simply who she is. And I love this book and how it grounds readers in whatever struggles or challenges they are facing. And it speaks to the beauty of a community that can support a person who is dealing with crisis and difficulty. And if it had not been for that community, this book would have never been in existence at all. And we're grateful to be able to come alongside Abigail, bring this book into print, because it required a lot of editing on our part. You mentioned that kind of long story you have with some authors, and in this case, that's very much the case. A similar title we have from the previous year is Weak is the New Strong by Todd Lawler. Todd has cerebral palsy and has needed extra support in every marketing endeavor that he does. He doesn't speak quickly at all. In fact, in every sentence he stutters. He cannot complete a sentence without long pauses and stuttering. But the way this book reads is brilliant, and I'm grateful that we've had it picked up by Tantor Media and that it was nominated for a Christian Book Award in the audiobook category. And having his book in an audiobook form makes a ton of difference for his readers and folks that he's working with. So this gives you some examples of some of our regional work and how we elevate voices in the marketplace. So let me talk a little bit more about bibliodiversity at the intersection of race, religion, and ethnicity, because for our academic publishing, this is probably the most serious ventures that we do. So let me show you these three titles of from our higher education list: Reimagining the Student Experience, The Diversity Playbook, and Diversity Matters. These books are read at predominantly evangelical institutions, and they're making a difference in questions of how those campuses interact with questions of race. And I might add that we are in desperate need of more conversations along these lines, and that readers need more options than the popular media. I hope you'll agree with me there. And these books are making a significant difference in how these readers understand and interact with questions of ethnicity and race. So I'm very proud of them. But let me show you one more text that I'm very proud of. In fact, I had it on the table yesterday during the vendor exhibit. This is more than one. It's our introductory world religion textbook. It's 8.5 by 11. It's full color. It's about 400 pages in length. And if you'll show the next slide, this is some of my favorite images that are from within this book. The goal in doing this text was to humanize religion, to move it from being a misperceived institution only. And as you can see from these photos, that Shintoism and Zoroastrianism and Sikhism involve people and human stories and faces. And we believe that More Than One can be a key resource in this field. And we've added a lot of rich alt text. If you'll show the next slide, that in a PDF form, you can put your cursor over it. And I've kind of simulated that for this PowerPoint display, in which we have alt text to help visually impaired readers to engage with the over 390 images that are in this book. I hope every library will want a copy. It goes on sale later this month. So what does bibliodiversity mean for us going forward? Well, I can see more text, like More Than One. We're working on a Christianity in the United States that will offer a much diverse picture of religion in this country and Christianity in this country. We're also working on a number of other works connected with interfaith studies, religious studies, and I'm in dialogue with some faculty at Abilene Christian who are doing studies on cave art in Texas. There are these amazing, marvelous, almost breathtaking cave art that's in places like Paint Rock that if I quizzed everybody in this room, where is Paint Rock, Texas, you would have no chance to find it. It's not far from Abilene. And the cave art that you'll find there casts shadows and interact with the sun, and you can see a living, breathing civilization long forgotten. And there's a lot of work to be done here to interpret and preserve those and bring them into public eyes. I don't know if that will be a children's book or if it'll bring something that's in a more trade market or something for academics. But fresh conversations, one beautiful book at a time. That's how ACU Press contributes to bibliodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Lisa.
Thank you, Charles, Jane, and Jason. I'll say a little bit about UGA Press and then get into my example of bibliodiversity, which is a bit different from the others in that it's a digital project. The University of Georgia Press was founded in 1938. We publish 70 books annually in the humanities and social sciences. As part of the flagship Land and Sea Grant, University of Georgia, UGA Press also publishes a strong regional list for citizens of the state and the Greater South, as well as creative work, including poetry and creative nonfiction and digital projects. Our list emphasizes accessible, peer-reviewed scholarship, a broad representation of voices and experiences, and public humanities. With apologies to the brilliant Atlanta hip-hop pioneers Outkast, we also believe that the South has something to say. Next slide, Charles. In 2018, the UGA Press was awarded a Humanities Open Book Grant from the NEH for what we called the Georgia Open History Library Project, acronym GOAL. Some of my colleagues called it GOOL, and I insisted on GOAL, and that's what I'm going to go with. We propose to publish open digital editions of nearly 50 out-of-print, single-authored, scholarly titles and 2 multi-volume series that focused on the colony and eventual statehood of Georgia in anticipation of the 250th anniversary of nationhood in 2026. Taken together, the goal comprises the most fulsome portrait of early Georgia and its inhabitants, European, indigenous, and diasporic African, available from primary sources. We recruited a diverse group of leading scholars to write new forewords for all of the books to provide context and increased relevance. What made our proposal unique is its strong focus on public-facing programming with a diverse group of statewide nonprofit humanities and historical organizations, from the Atlanta History Center to the Georgia Historical Society, Georgia Humanities, and the New Georgia Encyclopedia. Next slide. What also set our project apart is its emphasis on partnership with our sister units in the UGA libraries. We could not have done this project without the expertise and enthusiasm of our library colleagues. The director, archivists, and exhibit specialists at the Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library were heavily involved in suggesting titles for the project, providing copies of books for scanning, creating public programming, and participating in presentations on the project to statewide groups, including the Georgia Library Association and the Galileo Users Group. And I will now add the Charleston Conference to that list. Next slide, Charles. Our other internal institutional partner was the Digital Library of Georgia, a digital public library of America service hub. The DLG team coordinated cataloging and managed creation of MARC records, metadata ingestion, and enabled a wide range of links that ensured broad-ranging discoverability of our resources. Their technical expertise and participation were critical to the successful creation of and execution of the workflow. And here you can see a couple of the records created for 2 titles in the goal, including Laws of the Creek Nation. Next slide. The Hargret Library team over at Special Collections developed and hosted a fantastic interactive exhibit that included primary documents and iPad Pros that launched the goal in fall of 2021. And here you can see display cases with some of the primary documents that were digitized, made fully searchable and discoverable, contextualized through new material, and made openly available through the project. I believe the documents in the case on the left are handwritten letters from Lachlan McIntosh, a transplanted Scot who fought for Georgia, the colony, in the Revolutionary War, and is perhaps most well known for fatally shooting political rival Button Gwinnett in a famous duel. The exhibit, which included these amazing materials, ran for 3 months in our Special Collections Library and was available to all visitors, including local school groups and UGA students. Next slide. We also developed a pop-up exhibit that will eventually travel to well over 20 locations throughout the state through the duration of the grant in April of 2023. Here you can see some students at Emory University checking out the exhibit. Although the traveling exhibit doesn't include the rare primary documents from the beautiful Hargret Library exhibit, it does allow students, faculty, staff, and other patrons to explore the digital editions in Goal in Manifold Scholar, which is an open digital platform developed by the University of Minnesota Press and other partners, via the iPads and the Goal paperback library as well. We made these digitized books available as free and open ebooks, both through aggregators and consumer ebook vendors. And we also made available library cloth and paperbacks for purchase. And all of the editions that have been made available have found users and readers. So that sort of reinforces something I've always believed, which is you give folks as many choices as you can. We've also, we've seen steady purchases across formats for the purchasable formats, and even some as well as one inquiry about Chinese translation, which, you know, for a book that was published 50 years ago, and then when we brought it back, and now it's, you know, there's some translation interest, which I love. Talk about bibliodiversity. Next slide, Charles. So, what does bibliodiversity mean to a university press like Georgia, representing the flagship institution in a deep South state still struggling with its past, present, and future? To us, it means undertaking projects like the Georgia Open History Library that present old scholarship and primary documents in new ways, on the page, the screen, and beyond, through programming and conversations, exhibits, and open electronic access. I'm reading, Jane brought her book and I should have brought mine. I'm reading How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, and was struck by the quote here in relation to this presentation. So this is Dr. Ibrahima Seck, who is Senegalese and director of research at the Whitney Plantation Slavery Museum in Louisiana. And the quote is, "Books are really good, but who can read a book? Who can have access to books? This needs to be an open book up under the sky that people can come here and see." And he's talking about the Whitney Plantation, which tells the story, the plantation story through enslavement. And to me, bringing back these almost 50 titles and commissioning new forewords and involving almost every person in the press and a lot of folks at the libraries and on campus and then throughout the state through the tour, the exhibit tour, and the public conversations and the launch event and the speakers we've brought in. That to me is how the word is passed in a bibliodiverse world, and it captures the collaborative spirit of bibliodiverse public humanities that we aspire to at the University of Georgia Press. Thank you.
So thank you so much to the three speakers, and I think you can see the sense of place that all of you have also brought into Charleston, emerging in these stories from my colleagues. We have a couple of minutes for any observations or questions, and I'd like to ask you to say who you are and where you're from, if you make a comment, and then I think I'll need to repeat what you say from the podium as well, so other people can hear. But does anybody have any comments or observations they would like to share? Yes. So Jenny, thank you very much. Jenny from University of Tennessee, the press has recently moved into the library near Special Collections. How can collection services and the press work together to benefit each other?
Not just collection services, but library services.
Library services in general. Thank you very much. Lisa, you have an absolutely beautiful relationship with University of Georgia Library.
I do. And I've talked to Scott, the director at Tennessee, a lot about this organizational change and encouraged him, because it can be a very positive and generative relationship. I mean, for starters, just in relation to special collections, how does the presses list, backlist, and future projects, sort of represent or complement the special collections collections archives? What projects might you want to do together? Does the press have out-of-print backlists that the libraries could digitize and bring back and host in whatever the statewide digital library is for Tennessee? We've done some of that work with our libraries. It's hard for me to think about because it's part of our day-to-day. And at the same time, we're very autonomous. The press is allowed to do its work, and we're not micromanaged. And we started a library services or a scholarly publishing services unit that has allowed some folks that the libraries work with who want to publish things that aren't appropriate for our list to do so, take advantage of our expertise, and it's an a la carte fee-based service, but it is a service to the libraries and the institution. So those are just some thoughts, but I'd be glad to talk with you more. And
Jane, would you like to, also reporting into a library, add something? I would just point at this graphic as the microphone's coming across. I think any librarian in this space will see this is their mission statement as well. And that deep alignment of mission, I think, is the thing that really suggests the opportunities.
Yeah, I backing up everything Lisa said, and also, so both Cornell and Northwestern are, as I like to put it, under the umbrella of the libraries, separate units. Neither will look co-located, separate budgets, separate everything. But the press director reports to the library dean, and at both places, I strongly encouraged staff to get together with librarians, particularly acquisitions editors and subject area liaisons, the special collections, absolutely, in order to develop partner projects. Most of those need funding, I will say, so it's your director's job to go out and raise that money. I'm forgetting things. It's funny how one's mind goes blank when one is up here. Charles, help me out. What else do we have? I will say one thing really important. So what is it, 35, 38 university presses in America report up to libraries now, and every single one of those relationships is different. You want to talk about diversity? It's extraordinary. And so it's not cookie cutter. So, develop relationships, deepen your web of community, and collaborate where it makes sense.
And on that note, no, Jason, you want to say something about?
Yeah, I would just add very quickly, as a small press reporting to a library, we have very different skills than the librarians, but it's a very fruitful conversation because we're in different places in the book experience, from the creation of the book versus end users who are buying the book who want to disseminate it. And those can be really generative conversations, so I would encourage those.
Thank you. Thank you all for your attention, and enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you, speakers.